Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are on the diverse territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. Welcome to everyone in the room and online. My name is Lisa Brown, and I have the great privilege of being the Vice President of Administration, Finance, and Advancement here at Memorial University. And I hope, as you all know, we are celebrating our 100th anniversary, 100 years of impact. It's incredible to think of the impact that this institution has had in the province, and I'm so delighted that we're all here today to really honor that. You probably know that the university, Memorial University College, was actually founded to honor the sacrifices of the past with the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Our theme for our anniversary year, Looking Back, Launching Forth, pays homage to that vision. And I know we're going to hear a lot about that here this afternoon. I'm delighted that you're all here, and I encourage you to take a look at all of our centennial events that are happening over this next year. Delighted also to welcome our panelists and our Chancellor, and I'm going to pass over the afternoon to our very dedicated Chancellor, Earl Ludlow.
Thank you, Lisa. I always wonder what you're going to say when you introduce me, so it's my honor to serve as the Chancellor of Memorial University, and it's one I take very, very dear to my heart. I'm a proud Memorial graduate, two-time with a graduate degree as well as an undergraduate in engineering. Now, any success that I've had in my career, I will say I owe it entirely to this great institution. Which, by the way, and not that I'm biased, is by far the most important institution in our great province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And we must honor those who came before by ensuring that our university is the very best it can be. Our university must be strong in the future to continue producing the people and the leadership who will continue to support Newfoundland and Labrador. We celebrate the past and all we've accomplished with our focus on the future. So my job today is probably not an easy one. I'm going to try to moderate this group. So bear with me. I'll do my best. That's all I can offer. I look forward to it. Our panelists will each make a short statement, and then we'll begin with our discussion. Then we'll show you a video that was prepared that we use here at Memorial. And we will then take 20 minutes for Q&A from the audience. And we'll only be able to take questions from those in the audience and not be able to take any from online. I'll start by my introduction of the panelists. And this is going to be all over the place. It's not because they didn't seat where they were supposed to, it's just that's the way it is. And maybe I should say I'll start with the most important first. Private Olivia Massey is a Memorial student studying flute performance with a minor in political science and is a Canadian Army reservist serving as a musician in a regimental band. We have Dr. Jeff Webb, is a historian of Newfoundland and Labrador and head of the history department at Memorial. We have Frank Gogos. Frank is the chair of the Royal Newfoundland Regimental Advisory Council and the Royal Newfoundland Regiment Museum, an author and historian, and a World War I expert, and that's in his spare time. We have Gary Brown. Gary is an author, historian, former member of the Newfoundland National War Memorial Committee and Unknown Soldier Repatriation Project Committee. And we also have a very special guest joining us at the panel this afternoon, and that's the Commander of the Canadian Army, Lieutenant General Michael Wright. Welcome, sir. We're honored to have you. And by the way, I'll say this, I may end up calling you General, I may call you Michael, I don't know where I'll go, but that's all. Please accept my apologies in advance. Olivia, we're going to start with you with our opening statements, please.
Good afternoon. I want to start by saying how grateful I am to be here. Months ago, I was volunteering on campus when I saw Andrea Warman, the project manager of this event, wearing a maroon Centennial t-shirt. I asked if there was anything I could do to volunteer to help out with this event. I meant like volunteering at the door, setting up sound. A few weeks later, she emailed me with an invitation to be a panelist. So this is a bit unexpected, but I'm really grateful to be here. Memorial University was founded as a living memorial to those who lost their lives in the First World War. I think that's something many of us know, but don't always think about in our day-to-day lives. For me, though, that's something I carry with me as a student and as a reservist. I can see both sides of this legacy, the past that we are honoring and the future that we are building. I chose to study at Memorial University because I knew that Memorial would support my duties as a reservist and that I could pursue both my education and my service here. So I hope to reflect on the student experience today and think about how we can take this memorial to the future. Thank you for including me in this important conversation.
Thank you, Olivia. Frank, you're up next. Element of surprise.
Working? So I'm not as blessed to be able to talk off the top of my head, and if I did, I'd probably be here a lot longer. So I'm going to read from a script and share why I'm here today. My personal journey of remembrance began more than 30 years ago, shortly after my oldest child was born. I brought my son to visit my grandmother in Eastport, Bonavista Bay. She lived in a buff-colored salt box house built by my grandfather before he enlisted in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment in 1915. As long as I could remember, his pastel, hand-colored Royal Newfoundland Regiment portrait in a black and gold plaster frame hung proudly in the main room of the tiny home, keeping vigil over my grandmother, her guests, and extended family for decades. This ghost from my family's past was etched into my earliest memories. My firstborn changed my perspective and sowed the seeds of my ambition to leave behind a tangible family history. That afternoon, I decided to engage my grandmother in a conversation about my grandfather's wartime experience. Sitting at the chrome dining room table, I asked Grammy if Joe had ever talked about his experience in the war. She responded, "Oh my, yes." Then she lowered her head and stared at the floor. I waited patiently for some insight. For what seemed like an eternity, but after several minutes of silence, I realized she was weeping. My grandmother, who was very much the matriarch of the family, never entertained foolishness and was quick to give you a walloping backhand if you stepped out of line. And trust me, I did many times, but rarely showed any emotional weakness. I had no idea what hellish memories I had stirred up. I could not ask her that question again. For the first time, I realized that war was not just about the heroics and sacrifices of those who died, but also those who lived. The question that I asked my grandmother, which she could not answer, is what has given me the drive to do what I do today. I learned a lot about his service in the ensuing years. I can tell you he fought in 6 major battles. He spent a year as a guest of the Kaiser after being captured at Cambrai in December 1917. He was starved, beaten, and threatened with execution. He came home with those traumas. He brought them to his new wife, his only child, and that trauma came down to me and my children. Memorial gave me the hunger to learn, which was fed by some great professors in the history department, who instilled in me, using the words of Dr. Webb, the critical faculties required to analyze evidence and make balanced judgments. The lessons taught have guided me through my personal journey, one which has allowed me to share with many people. I have benefited greatly by the foresight of those who came back from the First World War, who were adamant about founding a living memorial, one which would provide higher learning in the hopes that those more educated could be the voices of reason if the world were to revisit the atrocities and the bloodshed and the trauma, which are very real and devastating outcomes of war. I am pleased to be here today to share my perspective with you. Thank you.
Jeff?
You'll have to pardon me. I'm used to teaching in 50-minute blocks, so I have a great deal I want to say, and I'm going to have trouble confining myself to just a couple. One of the things I wanted to start our discussion with was that what we choose to remember tells us more about who we are than it tells us about the people of the past. We remember and we commemorate in order to emphasize qualities and sacrifices of those that came before us that we still feel are relevant. The second point I wanted to make is that I frequently walk in through the main doors of the Arts Admin building, and of course the Book of Remembrance is sitting there, and not every day, but often I have a look at the names. And as we may discuss later, right, the page is turned each day and facing a new set of names. And anyone that has ever looked at this will see frequently it's July 1st, 1916, July 1st, 1916, July 1st, 1916. But there are many other dates as well. There are also Royal Newfoundland Regiment or Newfoundland Regiment. There are frequently the names of Royal Navy vessels as well. For us, for the community of Newfoundlanders, I think this tells us two things. First of all, the sacrifice of the regiment on July 1st, 1916 stands in our memory for many people that sacrificed themselves, both in the Navy and in the Army, in a great many different battles, a great many different vessels. Part of the reason why the regiment is almost synonymous with Newfoundland's sacrifice is because of the scale of death and wounds on that one morning, and also because for many of the Newfoundlanders serving in the Royal Navy, they were spread throughout a large number of vessels. When those vessels were damaged or sank, there would often be hundreds of men who would lose their lives. 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 would be Newfoundlanders. While the Newfoundland Regiment was drawn from pretty much nearly every community, outport, town in the country, and it exemplified the nation of Newfoundland in a way, the country of Newfoundland, in a way that no other institution in the colony ever did. So those are the kind of 2 points that I wanted to make to start our discussion today.
Thank you. You're up, Gary.
Thank you very much. My luck to follow the head of the history department. President Lokash, General Wright, Lieutenant Colonel Padre Sampson, Lieutenant Colonel Strong, senior officers of the Canadian Armed Forces, Deputy Chief of Police McNeil, faculty and students, alumnus, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor and privilege to be here today, and I sincerely wish Mon a happy 100th anniversary and wish the Royal Newfoundland Regiment a happy 230th birthday. It will be remiss of me as we sit here today in Memorial University discussing the living memorial if I didn't acknowledge former Mon Associate Vice President, the late Dr. Rob Shea, MSN. Dr. Shea passed away suddenly on May 20th, 2024, just days before he was scheduled to fly to France with Premier Fiore's provincial contingent to escort home the World War I remains of Newfoundland and Labrador's unknown soldier. Dr. Shea, affectionately known to us as Rob, worked so hard for over 3 years on our National War Memorial Committee and on the Unknown Soldier Repatriation Project Committee. Rob was relentless on ensuring that World War I and World War II members of the Newfoundland Merchant Marine received their well-deserved and often forgotten history of World War I. Rob so loved to brag about the Merchant Mariners Memorial at the Fisheries and Marine Institute. He served with distinction as our province's chair of the Canadian Armed Forces Liaison Council. In my humble opinion, Dr. Robert Shea was a true community role model who greatly enhanced Mon's iconic status as a living memorial. And our sincere best wishes go to Rob's wife, Dr. Rhonda Shea, of Mon's Education Department, and to her loving family. And I can tell you, Rob will never be forgotten. And our good moderator said to the historians he'd like for us to tell maybe some stories of remembrance. But I'll tell you one here that upset me. Just prior to Remembrance Day, November 11, 2024, I received a phone call from a very proud retired member of the Canadian Armed Forces, a Newfoundlander living in the Maritimes who had served with me in the 1960s in the Canadian Forces. He was disgusted, disheartened, and he felt disrespected that the administration of a regional school was requesting military personnel and veterans not to attend school remembrance ceremonies in uniform. Just think, ladies and gentlemen, these were the same uniforms that were proudly worn by the 158 Canadian Forces heroes who lost their lives in the Afghanistan War, including 13 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. It was also the same uniform worn by the men and women who served in Afghanistan and who today often suffer in silence with their mental wounds and physical wounds because of what happened in Afghanistan. The same uniform. Dr. Paul Bennett, Senior Fellow, Education Policy, Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and the adjunct professor at St. Mary's University made the following statement, and I quote, "Barring service and veteran uniforms from a school remembrance ceremony was a colossal blunder, but it is also symptomatic of wider trends eroding our schools. More needs to be done to revive a sense of historic consciousness, to change the school leadership culture for the sake of our future generations. We as a society," unquote, "we as a society must never forget the people who served, and especially those who died, and their families who lost so much so we can enjoy peace, liberty, and our full range of human rights, which we often take so much for granted. In my humble opinion, Mon, which was founded as a living memorial, has a strong moral obligation to ensure that it is a leader in fostering remembrance through its curriculum, respective ceremonies, and supporting our veterans, lest we forget. Thank you.
General Ray?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure, first of all, to be, I will absolutely agree with you, at what is such a vital institution for Newfoundland and Labrador. Real pleasure as well to be able to represent the Canadian Army and the Canadian Armed Forces on this panel, and to be with so many great members of the Canadian Armed Forces who are present here today. I've come into the Army at a very interesting time. I look at the threats that Canada faces now, and I deliberately say now, because although those threats will accelerate in the future, whether it is the effects of climate change, which as we've seen right here in this province, are causing havoc and increased use of all of our emergency first responders and of the Canadian Armed Forces. It's opening up our Arctic. It's changing the way that the Canadian Army needs to be ready to face a climate and an infrastructure that is very much changing. We are all bearing witness to what is changing within that rules-based international order, which has allowed Canada to prosper. And we are seeing countries like Russia and China absolutely taking advantage of friction in the rules-based international order. We are seeing the effects of emerging disruptive technology, and we're seeing misinformation and disinformation. So those are the threats that I wake up thinking about every morning. And what I'm trying to think about is how we can modernize the Canadian Army to be a vital national institution, to continue to protect Canadians and to represent Canada proudly around the world. What gives me hope and frankly resolve is, and why it's such a pleasure to be, first of all, at MUN, but as part of this panel, is I can look back at the history of the Canadian Army, of what made us a vital national institution. From Beaumont-Hamel to Capion, to the Medak Pocket, to Afghanistan, we all live the legacy of our forebearers, and I know that drawing upon their strength and some of the lessons that we'll talk about today are what is going to allow the Canadian Army to remain strong, proud, and ready as we move into the future.
Well, when I signed up for this task, I said, yes, this is going to be really interesting. I had no idea how difficult a job I've got. I'm sitting here paling in the presence of my peers. I have to tell you, awesome. So no game rules. So what we're going to do, I'll pose a question. This is not a political debate. It's not something we're just vote on Monday, but that's your choice. But what I will do is I'll pose a question, and I'd like for it to be discussed back and forth, come in, go out, and those types of things. And we'll do that for probably about a half an hour, and then we'll go off and into the questions from the audience. We'll do it that way. So I'm going to start with the first question. So maybe I got the easiest part of this. I'm not sure. So we'll find out in a minute. So my question is this. Like, we're a living memorial, which means we must continue to grow and to change. So there's the 100th anniversary that our VP Lisa referenced before. You know, we're looking back and we're launching forth. How do we honor the past, embrace change, so that when we're all here 100 years' time, we can say, look what we've done in a good way? I pose that question out first, and Jeff, why don't I open with you? You look too relaxed.
I was just saying a few minutes ago that as a historian, I have a very great deal of difficulty understanding the past, and certainly no insights into the future whatsoever. So thank you for that, Earl.
Glad to be of service.
I'm not quite sure where to start. I think one of the things that came up in our discussions yesterday, or was it the day before? One of the things that came up in our earlier discussion is who is this a memorial for? Is it just a memorial for those of us who were born in this province, who had family members, who had ancestors who fought in the regiment, or is it a memorial more broadly for those that have sacrificed themselves? Nurses, merchant mariners, as many people in the audience will know, during the Second World War, the casualty rate among merchant mariners was exceedingly high. So are we a memorial for only those who served in uniform, or are we also a memorial to those who otherwise served in uniform? And for me, part of what makes this more relevant now, and it's more relevant now, I think, than in a whole lot of ways, but part of what makes this more relevant now than a few years ago when I started teaching is that There was a time when the history of the First and Second World War seemed safely in the past. And I would be teaching courses on the rise of fascism to undergraduate students. I'd be teaching students about the Cold War. And they really seemed like interesting and academic in the more pejorative sense of academic topics. I taught the history of the rise of fascism in the Second World War again last year for the first time in a few years, and it seemed presciently more urgent. And when I talk to colleagues in other departments and talk to students in other departments, many of whom are from parts of the world that are currently engaged in conflict. I mentioned my friend from Ukraine the other day, but she's not the only example. That this continues to be really relevant and resonate. I started with a discussion today about how the act of remembering is a choice. We choose to remember some things and choose to forget others. I think that the challenge will be for future generations of keeping a positive view of the future in their remembrance of the past. I'm sorry if that's not, but anyway, that perhaps a place to start.
Thank you. Frank?
Thank you, Earl. You know, I think one way that this university can embrace the future of remembrance is by embracing the young people, and not just the young people from this province, but from all over, because as Dr. Webb has said, many of them come from war-torn countries. And when they come here, you know, they should be aware that this is a memorial. When you enter the halls, when you sit in the classrooms, this has always been, was always meant to be, to remember those who gave their lives and to give opportunity to those who had to get higher education when it wasn't available.
I think to continue to embrace Memorial's foundation is to make it more visible and living part of students. There's so many students, just like me, who are also serving. I think that we could have events and memorials for people right now that are serving and are in the university, because that really connects the university to the regiment and to the armed forces generally right now. And it's a present thing that I think a lot of students don't really understand how many there are.
I think there's many ways that Mon can, and it's, again, I sound like a broken record, has the moral obligation to be the leader in remembrance on a worldwide status, internationally, because we are the only memorial that I know of, I stand to be corrected, that is a memorial to those people who lost their lives. So, but you need someone to lead, you need someone to be accountable, you need someone to remind the troops down the ladder that this is part of your mission statement, who we are, why we are. We're looking back to see ahead. And we have so much to be proud of. And it is not only just about those who fought, it's the loved ones on the home front, the nurses, the voluntary aid detachments, the forestry corps. There are so many of them. And Newfoundland is so lucky to have the history of remembrance that we have. But Mon has to be the leader. And I challenge Mon and the new president to be that leader, but it won't happen by mistake. You have to do things and you have to discuss and you have to be open and you have to have some lively discussions with your students. But if they don't remember, I believe it's our fault for not reminding them to remember and help them, because I've worked with a lot of young people in the last 30 years dealing with remembrance, and when they get involved, they get so keen and they say, wow, I didn't realize that most of these boys were younger than me, 15 and 16. 272 fallen boy soldiers of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment were teenagers when they lost their lives. 114 have no known graves. Think about that. Think about being a parent some 3,000 or 4,000 miles away. How do you commemorate? So I think it's very important.
Thanks, Gary.
I have some thoughts on how the university can remind students about this memorial. And I was remembering this past November 11th. The university had a ceremony at the School of Music where I was studying, but I couldn't go to that ceremony because I had a class that day. Students, at the same time as this November 11th ceremony, are in classrooms and taking tests. I think that during the hours of that ceremony, the university could stop classes, or at least exams, and we can go and watch that ceremony and participate.
We think a lot alike, you know. So let me just keep going around a little bit more. So, you know, we're talking about the past. I used the phrase earlier the week, you know. So, thank you. So, it was only earlier the week I had talked about, you know, we can't always dwell in the past. We can learn from the past. But how do we build for the future? And I think that's your point. And you know what we're saying is building for the future. It's always harder to look ahead than looking back. And my standard line is if you drive your car by the rearview mirror, you're going to end up in the ditch. But you know, we got to never forget where we came from. And I think that's the culmination of this discussion.
I think Olivia's idea is very simple to implement, and should be implemented. And I commend you for making it simple.
So, those are the types of things. They don't have to be massive steps to build to the future. So I'm going to just change it a little bit now. This year, we saw the return of the unknown soldier. And I will say that I had the privilege and honor to be part of that repatriation team. And I will tell you, it has impacted me personally more than I even thought was possible. And I won't do it today because I did it on CBC Radio this week and I tried to speak about it and I got emotional. And it's that fundamental. So the question I'd put out to the group here is, what does the return of the unknown soldier mean in relation to Memorial University? Or is there a connection? And how does it build?
If I may take that one first, Chancellor, someone who spent 5 years working on the committee, which I was so proud of, with Berkeley Lawrence and Frank Sullivan and many others in steering committees, it was really something. And I had the extreme lifetime honor of being an honorary pallbearer. And I walked for over a mile right next to the remains of that unknown soldier. And it made me do a lot of thinking. But I said, how would I do it today to make people somewhat aware? And I say this to you too, sir, and I gave you a copy of it before we started. I'd like to just let you in on something. On May 25th, 2024, a Canadian Armed Forces passenger plane arrived at the St. John's Airport with the unknown soldiers' repatriated remains. The plane was accompanied by 2 CF-18 escort jets. Let me quote to you the now what I believe to be historic radio transmission of Lieutenant Colonel Renault to the escorting VIPs and guests who were in that plane. This is what he said, and I quote, "Dear passengers of CAN Force 4147, I am Lieutenant Colonel Maxime Renault, commanding officer of 425 Tactical Fighter Squadron based out of Bagotville, Quebec. I am on your left wing, flying a CF-18 Hornet. On your right wing is my wingman, Captain Jake Chu, also of 425 Squadron. It is our honor and privilege to be part of this extremely important mission today. As you enter the Canadian sovereign airspace and the airspace over Newfoundland and Labrador, we are here to stand guard for the remains of a true hero who gave his life more than a century ago fighting tyranny in Europe. We will ensure your aircraft is provided safe passage until its arrival at St. John's International Airport. Honorary Andrew Fury, Premier of the Province of Newfoundland and Labrador, thank you for being the designated next of kin and accompanying our hero back home." And Colonel, he finished up by saying, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God. We stand on guard for thee," unquote. And I had the extreme honor to be standing next to Colonel Sean Sampson, the Padre, when the remains were put in the hearse at the airport. So that is so moving to me, and it shows about the past, the living, our men and women of our proud Canadian Armed Forces who are with us fighting today and learning to be better citizens and helping us at home. It all works together, but we gotta be together and we gotta discuss and not go off in tangents away from one another.
100%.
So I was one of those people along with Earl on that flight coming home, and we often get asked a question because we discussed that we wouldn't bring up this question because we don't know how to compartmentalize the emotions that over that 4 short days that we had the privilege to be a part of that contingent to bring him home. And when those aircraft appeared off the wings, my knees had given out. And here comes the emotion that it was a culmination of a recognition of the sacrifice of the Dominion of Newfoundland from the First World War, the last of the empirical countries to repatriate one of their own. And for us to be given that special privilege by Canada, who had accepted our unique history within this confederation, and the CWGC, who said this will be the last time it's going to happen, is absolutely extraordinary and probably one of the most,
Don't be sorry, Frank, that he's worth it, so don't be sorry.
If I could just add something to this. In a more abstract level, part of what makes the unknown soldier so symbolic is that he indeed could be any one of us. You know, it reminds me, I was mentioning this the other day when I was in Washington, D.C. a few years ago, and the Vietnam War Memorial, which if any of you have seen, it's a large stone wall that emerges from the ground in one area and rises to an apex and then descends to the ground and records all of the names of the American servicemen that died in the Vietnam War. Notably, it doesn't include the hundreds of thousands or millions of Vietnamese and Cambodians who died, but it records the names of the Americans. And as somebody that was a Canadian and too young anyway, I still found it surprisingly moving to stand there and look at all these names engraved on this wall and have a reflection of my own face on the wall and thinking, if circumstances were different, my name would be here instead of my seeing my own reflection. And so I think the way that this connects to the unknown soldier is that the unknown soldier is a symbolic remembrance not only does he stand in for all of those whose names we don't know, this could indeed be any one of us if circumstances were different. So I think this is part of the powerful legacy of this. And if we were to find next week, somebody said, oh, we know his name now. We know that the town he was from. In a way that would kind of diminish the relevance and the power of the unknown soldier as a symbol.
absolutely.
Thank you. Anything further? Anyone? No? That's okay.
No, I know that, I think I'll have the opportunity to talk a little bit later about it, but I'll just mention, this is so it took the Army Sergeant Major and I 10 months to get to Newfoundland. It actually took me 54 years as a Canadian to visit Newfoundland and Labrador. So I've had just an incredible time since arriving here on Thursday, but absolutely one of the highlights, if not the highlight of my time here, was the opportunity that I had with Gary to hear about the story of not only the National War Memorial, but of also the repatriation of the unknown soldier. So it was a great honor for the Army Sergeant Major and I to be part of that and to see the passion of people like Gary and Frank. Frank took us through the rooms yesterday, and it is so incredible to see, whether it's with MUN itself as a living memorial or with the National War Memorial and the unknown soldier, how remembrance is a everyday part of the fabric of life in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Oh, thank you. It's you know, and I'll just reflect again. When I got on that airplane that day to leave here and go, I knew I'd read a lot and done a lot, but I had no idea of the impact that it would have had on me. And and I've been involved in a lot of things over the years through history and things with this province. Pretty incredible, actually. So that was last year. I know there were other things. We had the identification of an unknown soldier as well from Private Lambert. That was another one that had basically been uncovered from Cockles Cove, I think, or Quidividi, that area. Pretty incredible findings that continue to happen. So how do we build all this passion and think about 15 years' time and 20 years' time? That's where my head goes. I want a vision for Memorial. How do we drive Memorial? Like, we've got such a pent-up sense of belonging and why we exist, and successes through our various campuses like MI and Grenfell and Harlow and our Labrador campus, and all the rest. How do we turn this into that success? And that to me is the real challenge, because we can do it. Frank knows me. I don't give up. So that's just, I just don't give up. I'm not going to. We have got to turn this energy and build on it. Frank's ready.
Yeah. 9 years ago, we remembered the service and sacrifice of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment in the First World War. But thanks to our unique history and our previous life as a self-governing dominion within the Empire, and then the late addition to the Canadian Confederation, we are now remembering 80 years since the end of the Second World War. But there has been a group of Newfoundland soldiers that have somehow been somewhat forgotten over the years, and have taken a back seat to the First World War commemorations. But you ask, how can you proceed in the next 20 years? 20 years from now, it's the 100th anniversary of those men and women who went overseas. And the two artillery units that represented the action, we consider them a part of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. And one of the ways, besides MUN, I'm going to throw this over to the General, that we could recognize and pay homage to their service and sacrifice is to officially allow them to be a part of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment and issue battle honors and or theater honors for their time. I'm sorry, I took the opportunity.
Gary?
Earlier you mentioned about what MUN can do, but it's not going to happen by mistake, as I said. And as I alluded to earlier, from the day someone comes through the hallowed doors of Memorial University with the name Memorial, for all those people, they got to be made aware of that. And I think we chatted earlier, you told me there was over 121 countries that people come here today and are part of that 18,000 present-day students, active students here. And they have to come, and they have to come learn about our traditions and learn about and we stand back and try to hide them, show them, tell them why that name Memorial. Is it part of their joining instructions? Then we have to challenge our professors, every one of them, whether it's our history professors or medicine, what they learned through wars, what we learned, it can be done. I've seen it been done with students. Fred Hoxley, a former member of MUN, professor retired, they're working with some bond students and they're teaching them how to make their own gardens. And the first important thing they tell them, General, in that garden is the forget-me-not flower, Newfoundland's remembrance flower, 2 years before the poppy. And why did they remember it took me years to find out the symbolism of the forget-me-not. Why were we remembering that? And why did our Great War Veterans Association make it our remembrance flower? Why? Because our young boys, most of them kids, who left the bays and inlets and the beaches, saw that little flower as they were growing up on the beach. And then when they went to Belgium and France, and all the war and the bombings and millions of rounds were cultivating the soil, the forget-me-not was growing up there. So that's something they left at home, saw it there, and took it back with them. But there's so many things that Memorial can do in every department. But again, Chancellor, I can say to you, it can't happen by saying, I'll leave it with you. Someone has to lead it, and someone has to call it in when it's not been done.
Thank you. Olivia.
I know that in my classes and between my peers, students, they don't know that Memorial University is a memorial. I think that this could be greater emphasized at orientation, and again, when you graduate, so it's part of your whole journey. And there's a MUN 101 course that every student reluctantly has to take. But the founding of this university can be tested on that very short course, so that every student is aware of the importance of the university that they're studying at.
You're going to be busy in the future. You realize that, don't you? So I'm watching my time, and I think we're in good shape here. So yeah, I've heard that before. Thanks, Gary. So Memorial University is unique to Newfoundland and Labrador. And Newfoundland and Labrador is unique in itself. I would say it that way. It's like no other place. So where we are is who we are. It's as simple as that, you know. And is this statement more relevant than we were founded as a living memorial to those who made the ultimate sacrifice in the First World War? There's a challenge. Think about that. We were founded as a memorial, but where we are is who we are. And I think one builds on the other if you think about it. That's a deep thought question. And I don't know if anyone would venture into that one.
Well,
thanks, Gary. I knew you would, buddy.
As a historian, and I carry my notes everywhere with me. And again, I wanted to say what was important, but oftentimes here we're sounding like we're challenging MUN, and we are. But MUN has done such wonderful work over the years with veterans.
Your mic.
Oh, sorry.
No, just move it up to your...
Okay. MUN has done such work over the years with veterans. And I want to quote, while doing research for today's panel discussion, I came across a very interesting article in the 2001 Newfoundland Quarterly by the late Dr. Malcolm MacLeod, and people will know him from here. Native Nova Scotian, scholar, former well-respected MUN History Department educator, and past president of the Newfoundland Historical Society. And he was talking just about that, Chancellor, in his article. And here's what he said, and I quote, "Of all the universities in Canada, the one with the most profoundly meaningful name is Memorial University of Newfoundland. It is a name worth dissecting and dwelling upon. The college that opened in St. John's in September 1925 was given a very special name." MacLeod went on to tell how every morning a senior MUN security staff member turns a new page in the Book of Remembrance situated in the Arts and Administration Building in the Memorial. And here's what else he said about that, and I quote, "If Memorial ever wished to give the higher profile to the idea of a university as an act of remembrance, a recorded verse of the Ode to Newfoundland could play while the page-turning ceremony is being performed, and traffic through the lobby would cease. It would, however, be an impressive way to remind everyone, students, staff, and faculty and visitors, that Memorial is the name that really means something serious. The list of the war dead reads like a roll call of family names in a large Newfoundland school as the boys come home bloodied from recess, unquote.
Boy, that's deep.
You asked for deepness.
Oh, sir. And Gary, you've never let me down yet, sir. I'd say that. Thank you. Any other commentary?
I think that these two statements that we're talking about, I don't think one is more relevant than the other because the two of them are so interconnected. World War I was different for Newfoundland than everywhere else. An entire generation of men fought together, and they weren't just neighbors, they were brothers and cousins. And that shaped the province's history and the culture here. And the university was founded on that. And then the founding of the university was also, again, influencing the culture and the people in Newfoundland through education. So both of them, in that way, are part of the university's mission.
It's a good point you raised because the university has created leadership. It's developed the entire, it has educated itself out of, I was going to say out of poverty, but it's educated itself to the level it is today, which is quite significant from, I think there was a quote, I forget who said it, but that a visiting journalist said visiting Newfoundland was like visiting a third world country back in the 20s. So think about that. And we're talking about a country that was, sickness, poverty, leaders were imported. And I love that statement. But, so to today, we look at what has happened and the impact and how we keep growing. And that's your point. And I think, Olivia, taking that forward and building on that, there's huge heights that can be done and the impact is there.
I think one of the other ways we might think about Memorial's effect is to imagine a Newfoundland without Memorial. As many people know, Newfoundland had a very sectarian, divided educational system, social system, until well into the 20th century. And we can easily imagine in the 1920s there emerging three mediocre universities, a Methodist, an Anglican, and a Roman Catholic one. We can easily imagine that having happened. But it was the insights of a group of educators who realized that if Newfoundlanders could die in the trenches together, they could sit in the classroom together. And that allowed them to put aside the entrenched multi-generational separateness and focus the limited economic resources and the limited human resources on creating one great institution that could transform the country and the province rather than remain in a system of essentially apartheid where people were unable to come together to a common goal.
Big step happened, didn't it? And if you go back to 1925, that was a huge bridge that got crossed. And sorry, Frank, I thought you were going to.
Yeah, okay. All right, give me the mic. I'll take the mic. One of the things, I guess, one of the positive things that actually came out of the First World War with the troops that served was education, actually. So, in the outports where schooling was more difficult or you were expected to be grown up by the age of 12 and out and about you went, you didn't go much further than that. You might have some rudimentary experience writing your name or not. Many of them signed with an X. But it was recognized during the war and within the regiment that we needed to educate those soldiers. And so the first semblance of education for quite a few, not all, but quite a few, was started in the regiment. And Tommy Ricketts, who we all know here as Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, who was awarded the Victoria Cross, when he joined, he couldn't sign his own name. When he left in 18, he was signing his name and he could write rudimentary. And then they took him under his wing and they brought him into Bishop Field, where they get, basically as a 18-year-old, he started school for the first time. And by 1925, he was a part of the very first class of students in this institution. And by the end of the first year, he was an apprenticed pharmacist. And that's an extraordinary transformation and one of the positive things that came out of the trenches and evolved into this university.
If I may, like I said, about Memorial University, and just give some quick statistics for those people who, as we call it, gingerly come from away, and just let you know that Mon did a lot right. In 1925, when Memorial was started, the Dr. Peyton at the time, the president, walked to the National War Memorial with in their regalia, whatever the proper term, caps and gowns are, and they walked in that parade. He wanted them to, because he wanted those young students to realize who they were part of. So can you imagine seeing that walking down Duckworth Street, all the professors and students in their best regalia? But there was a lesson they were teaching them. Also, General, in World War II, 310 students from Memorial University joined the war effort. 30 of those Mon students never came back home, died or were missing. So that's another reason why they should do it. And then was a very interesting, I'm sure there are members here from the Student Union Council, and you play a major role. Not only your faculty, but you are an important part. And you hold a lot of power in who you are and what you say and during your demonstrations, but you need to be part, and we want you to be part of this. And here's what happened in 1974. They had a torchlight parade where faculty and students participated. They left here, where we're sitting, and marched down to the War Memorial. And it was raining, and there was even a student in a wheelchair. And they were asked by the Legion, to be part of a function the next day. The union said, no, we want to do something special for those we lost. And what they did, they walked in the rain with torchlights. And Dr. Ben Gardner is here tonight. He was one of the ones that assisted. Then, I don't mean to age you, Dr. Gardner. I know you're over there to my left. I'm going to probably get something thrown at me. But just think about it. They left here in 1974 at 11 p.m. at night in the rain. And they walked all the way to the War Memorial with torches, and the people from St. John's came out and said, wow, who's this? They are our new generation to come, our educators, our leaders. So they wanted to do that themselves. So there's been a lot of work done by Memorial University over the years, and with the Royal Canadian Legion, who they had lots of functions, and I'm glad the function tonight, Colonel Strong, is between the regiment and Memorial, because Memorial was doing that for the Royal Canadian Legion way back, but we sort of got a little bit out of it. So today, going forward, say, let's go back to our roots and let's regenerate, let's recharge our batteries, because you have an awful lot. And I say to Memorial University, thank you so much for what you're doing and what you have done.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary. It's an interesting, I'll just add a little commentary here that we sometimes forget what has been accomplished in the past while. And a few weeks ago, or probably a few months ago now, I was doing some work in a speech I was giving, and we took one item per decade of significant advancements at Memorial. And to give you a flavor, I can't go through the whole 10 of them. I'll probably get 3 or 4 of them. But, like telemedicine. Just think about that. That came out of here. It was Dr. Mack's house, if my memory serves right. Let's talk about the engagement or the Mon Extension services and the work they did in the rural communities at a time when it was being decimated. And I could use a close to home process. It's the Fogo process. Fogo Island process is a prime example of it. You want to go another one? I'll use this one. I keep falling back to it because, well, The fish stick was invented here. I got to go there, Dr. Paul. All right, the Newfoundland curse, the heart gene, the gene was identified, and the number of lives that's been saved by that, and the list just blew me away as I went through it and did the research. We don't talk about that stuff. There are so much things that we've talked about as a result of why we exist. That's the positives. And when you think about it that way, I can only imagine what's going to happen in the next 50 years, 100 years, because we're on an upslope that's incredible. And the more I think about it and what I've seen, and since I've joined as chancellor here 3 years ago, the amount you learn and what you see, and as Gary said, the engagement with the Canadian Armed Forces. Like, we're talking a lot about young boys and young men. Let's never forget the young ladies, the nurses, and the female contingents that came through and through the period of time. Let's never forget about the other, the Navy, the Air Force, and Frank, I think you mentioned that earlier. This is about all of it. It so happened, though, that it triggered off the Army and the regiment with the 1925. But post-World War II, it also then included all aspects. So I know it's a bit of a ramble, but for those that aren't familiar with it, there is so much that we have to be proud of. And, we always look for the next piece. But as my mentor said to me a long time ago, Earl, you got to stop looking up the mountain and every now and then stop and look backwards and see the valley you came out of, right? And it's true when you think of it that way, because we have so much as an institution to be proud of. And I'm hearing it all here. It's running very strongly, the heartfelt, why we're here, what we should do, how we go forward, and yes, we can do it. I think that's the answer to that. So. Before we close these types of questions, is there anything you'd like to conclude before we play a video and then go to questions and answers? I open mic.
Maybe just going back to one of the first questions about how do you honor the past while embracing change? I think it's important the end, because it's exactly what we're dealing with as we try to modernize the Canadian Army. It's not a binary choice. And in fact, if anything, honoring the past should give us the resolve to know that there are things we need to change from what we've done in the past, certainly in the Canadian Army. As you look at the senior leadership between myself, the division commander and sergeant major, and the Army sergeant major, we've all got about 35 years in uniform. We've seen various crises in culture, including one about 4 years ago, that frankly put our institution at risk. So embracing change means understanding that nostalgia can be dangerous, and understanding that there are things that we have done in institutions in the past that have been completely unacceptable, and that we need to continue to always seek greater diversity of thought. Cognitive diversity is just as absolutely important as the type of diversity we're trying to gain from having Canadian society better represent the Canadian Army and the Canadian Armed Forces. But to me, it's really understanding that it is not either or. It is building upon the strength of the past and those who brought us to where we are to move forward boldly into the future.
Thank you. It means a lot. Thank you. So on that note, we're going to wrap up and thank you for concluding very nicely, by the way. And that was not planned, I might add. That's the reason you're the general. So what we will do now is we're going to wrap up the discussion here. And we have a video that we play at the ceremony of remembrance every year. And it's pretty neat. It's amazing is the words I would use. So we're going to play that video now, if we could, please.
The past does indeed echo down through the present. It was, I think, a great gesture of hope in 1925 to found an institution that was to educate people. And I think that is a great gesture of hope for the future.
This university will live as a symbol of enlightenment that cannot die. I saw it today as a beam from a lighthouse of learning, nourishing the development spiritually, intellectually, and economically of Newfoundland, now and for generations to come.
It would be extremely difficult to overestimate the contribution that Memorial has made to every aspect of life in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Let us not fall into the trap of taking for granted a memorial that is now so big and so pervasive. Hold it in your mind. Cherish it. It has made us what we are. It will continue to be the dynamo that drives our society.
Memorial University seems to be determined to transform culture, to correct historical omissions, to genuinely engage in reconciliation, to welcome diversity, to make its home here, and in all ways, make a real difference.
It's more than bricks and mortar and teachers and students. It's a place where we can learn, where we can grow, where we can develop, and more importantly, where we can safely dream about the future of Newfoundland and Labrador.
I think that's as good a summary of the last hour of discussion that you're going to get. I think it is all summarized. So I want to thank everyone for their participation so far. Now comes the next part. So we're going to open the floor for questions, if I may. And Andrea has a mic. If you have a question, and please don't be shy. One behind you. There you go.
Hi, my name is Chris Gardner. I'm a retired university employee, 31 and a half years, and also a graduate, class of 2022 with a BA in history. No, I never had you, Dr. Webb, so you can relax. But hearing what you said, Dr. Webb, there about your morning ritual, you go to the book. When I used to work 6 to 2, part of the route there, I would pass down one end of the arts building to the other. And what I would do, I would just take off my hat, turn left, look at the memorial, the color arms, everything. And I just go ahead and just put the cap on. It's my way of showing respect. And here in the video, they're talking about getting a chance to grow. You know, my time's working here not only as an employee, but also a student. It gave me a damn good chance to grow. I don't know the maturity, but that's a different story. but looking back at it, I would say, thank you for giving me a chance. You know, so thank you.
Hi, my name is Julia Halfyard, and I work with the Student Experience Office within the Student Life component at Memorial University. And our mandate really is to create experiences for students, particularly the first-year student. Because of that, we do have a huge ceremony. I know that the Chancellor is involved, as well as the President and the Provost and all. And we collect our students. We gather them in the field house, so there could be 1,500 first-year students. And within that ceremony, we do honor the past, and we do make reference to the Great War and the Great Wars and the reason why Memorial has begun. And we take that very seriously. We're very proud that we've done that for the last 8 years or more. That is just simply, I think, the tip of the iceberg. And I thank you. This is not a question to anybody, but I wanted to take a moment to thank you very much for this discussion. I think it's really important for this university, particularly now as we've refined our identity and who we are as a university to the people of this province. My parents are both graduates of this university, very proud graduates, and they were the first gen students that came here. And I think my father, in fact, came to this university on Elizabeth Avenue, and its first year on Elizabeth Avenue, and his first year was on Parade Street. So he really does acknowledge how important Memorial is to my parents who were from the Bay, my grandparents and my great-grandparents who really did grow up in third world nation of Newfoundland, very poor, very impoverished, and university education and, becoming a part of Canada was really instrumental in helping our families and helping our families grow. So we as a family are very proud alumni of this university and do take this reflection on why we are here very seriously. So personally, I thank you for this discussion. Professionally, I think it's extremely important. And Olivia, we will be chatting with you so much about, don't even think that you're gonna not have a conversation with our unit, because I think these offerings and these ideas that come from students are really impactful. I'm already thinking of the Book of Remembrance and how we can embrace that more. I'm already thinking about how perhaps we could get the regiment at the matriculation ceremony. But these kind of ideas come from discussions and come from a lot of conversation. So thank you so much.
Well,
good afternoon. My name is Ethna Daly, and I'm a Mun grad 81 and 82, and also a very recently retired senior high school history and English teacher. And along with my sister Nora, we are granddaughters of a Blue Putty, regimental number 170, Thomas Connors. And my question revolves around what I chose to dedicate my career to, which was the teaching of history in senior high. And my worry is that in the last decade, the teaching of world and Canadian history has been removed from the senior high curriculum in Newfoundland and replaced with a more generic, wide-ranging social studies course. Would someone from the panel please respond to the question, what is Memorial's place in lobbying the department to return the outcomes of Canadian and world history to the teenagers of our province?
I picked the microphone up, but I think there are other people that are as well qualified to speak to this as I am. And I was really struck by the general's comments earlier about the threats to the world that we now face and having to change as institutions. I don't think there has been a time in my lifetime or in the lifetime of anybody that's here where the teaching of history hasn't been of greater importance. We're facing a world in which up is down and inside is out. People lie to themselves, they lie to each other, and it's only through, as Frank made reference to earlier, it's only through being able to evaluate evidence, weigh arguments, that we can make choices and know the path forward. We have had many years, to your point, we've had many years of young people being told by high school guidance counselors that if you're smart, you should do STEM. That if you're smart, you should do one of the math-oriented fields. And if you can't do those, well, maybe as a fallback, you can do education. I think we need a greater balance in our society where all of the great need that there are for skilled trades are respected, where the critical thinking is respected, where we have a sense of the past, and as Earl put it so well, to not be bound by the past, but to use it as a tool to build in the future. So certainly thank you to you and to the many other people that have reached out in your own way to remind people that history curriculum in the school system is very important.
I'd like to add to that as well. When this happened a few years ago, there were teachers who were absolutely distraught and others who didn't understand that this was going to be impactful. For those of you who don't know Newfoundland's history, it's not the same as that of Canada. It's different. We have a very vibrant history in all aspects. We might be small, we might have been a small population, but we contributed globally far greater than most people are aware of. And you're not going to get that from Wikipedia, and it is incumbent on the government that they recognize that and bring that type of discussion back into the high schools, back into the junior high schools, and embrace our history with all of its warts and all of its heroism and all of its greatness. And don't leave it to Wikipedia and TikTok and whatever else is out there with misinformation and lies and whatever.
If I may, and thank you for bringing that up, but again, when I talked about the team effort, your point brings it up. These where there is the home with it, making the new teachers of tomorrow, the people who will run the school boards, who will run it all. They're being made here at MUN. They're being taught what's important. So that's why I say the team effort has to be here. MUN has to do the leadership of it and make it so people like yourself and the young Newfoundlanders, when they leave the halls of academia here, will go out and challenge us and challenge the school boards and challenge the governments and say, you're doing it wrong, and I know you are, and I'm going to let you know about it. That's the team effort that has to be done.
Olivia, there you go.
I am a teenager of this province, and I finished Newfoundland and Labrador's public high school system last year. I think, to answer your question, there's a shared responsibility between the university, the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and the greater community of Newfoundland and Labrador to put pressure on the provincial government and the Department of Education to reconsider the social studies and history curriculum.
Thank you all for the lovely discussion in the panel. And Mr. Godos just sort of anticipated my question a bit. But as we see more and more Newfoundlanders born before Confederation passing away and simply aging out of the larger portion of the population, we're seeing more symbols and signs and remembrance of Newfoundland's pre-Confederation history passing away. Even though we remember World War I, the 1812 battle honors of the regiment are often forgotten, Detroit and the defense of Canada. I know it was against protocol to do this, but there was a lot of disappointment with the Return of the Unknown Soldier not being covered by the Union flag rather than a Canadian flag. And here at Memorial, the flag policy, I believe, was changed around 10 years ago so that the Union flag doesn't fly every day, but only flies about twice a year. The flag under which the regiment fought in both World Wars and the War of 1812. So my question to the panel is, while remaining faithful to Canada, how do we remain proud and remember the history of Newfoundland as both a colony and then a self-governing dominion? Thank you.
Go ahead, Frank.
That's a very good question, actually. You know, we can have both. We can celebrate our uniqueness in the Canadian Confederation. And I think what I've learned in the last few years is that those powers that have suppressed that are starting to embrace it. They're starting to understand that we are a little bit unique and that our story is a little bit different. And we just need to keep pushing and educating and helping people understand that difference.
The comment I would add to that is that we also need to not only embrace, as I said earlier, the past, but things have changed as well. There are other factors that now influence. We have, much greater understanding of our Indigenous communities that we have to be embracing as well. And in fairness, we have to, as we should, by the way. And there are factors that 25 years ago wouldn't even been talked about. So one of the things I would suggest is that a university, by its very nature, should be and is one of free thought and constructive thought, and how we engage that change. And I am one that will say, I'm a traditionalist, and I have to stretch my gray matter a lot when I'm thinking about this stuff. But I will tell you that, the way I thought when I graduated from engineering in 1980 is not the way I think today. That don't mean everything I did in 1980 is wrong, but it means I have to include and be inclusive and bring more factors into the discussion. And I think that's the real challenge as we go forward, because there are now other extraneous factors nationally, internationally, that impact our little island that 100 years ago, it was just us, 50 students and 7 or 8 profs. Excellent question, by the way. So thank you.
If I may refer, they are excellent questions, and you talked about the flags and that. I was a member of that committee of refurbishing the War Memorial and bringing home our unknown soldier. And I can tell you we've had flag debates there that the room with the windows will go in and out, but they're really important. And just another example of how we have to be careful. And I'm a past chair of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment Advisory Council, and probably because of my age, one of the senior people on it, and proud of that. But you bring up something that we have to be so cognizant of, and it was mentioned a few times here today, but got to be kept being remembered, is the other services who fought. Every Newfoundlander, in a lot of things I've gone to, will automatically first come up is our hero, Tommy Ricketts, and rightly so. But I'll tell you, and I've been at places, and I've set people up, and I've asked them, who is Leander Green? And the people just looked at me. And people with a background in the naval corps and reserves, and very few of them, if anyone, knew his name. And I say to you out of respect that Leander Green, from a point of view, he jumped into the cold waters of the North Atlantic on January 1st at 11 p.m. in the nighttime when there was a merchant ship sinking from a submarine, a German submarine that put it down, and he saved the lives. He took off his shirt in the middle of January in the North Atlantic and dove in, no lights, and saved 5 people. I think he should have probably have won also the Victoria Cross. So we have to be very, very careful to remember all the other services, and because their families, their loved ones, it's so important. And not because I will give credit to Colonel Strong. He always says to me, Gary, that's right, you're right, and here's something he'll remind me of it, that he wants to make sure, have the Navy boys been involved and the Merchant Marine. So that's something, ladies and gentlemen, would be remiss of me if we would leave here today. And that young man made some excellent points. And for those of you who don't know about Leander Green, I suggest you please look it up, because he was one heck of a hero. Thank you very much.
Hello, good. Oh, hi. David Gill, I'm an associate professor over at the Faculty of Education, but I'm going to speak for myself. I'm not speaking as a faculty member or anything like that. So a lot of good ideas, a lot of good talk. I want to ask you a question because just recently, Senate had a very controversial vote on the Ode to Newfoundland to bring it back and things like that. And you're talking about values here and what we, I'm going to try to articulate this. I'm not going to make any judgments about the vote or anything, but I'm going to bring up this point that in the survey, right, there was almost 4,000 people surveyed. That's a pretty large sample size for any social sciences survey. And across all demographics, it was over 80%, I think, that felt the ode should come back. But the governance structure of MUN, right? The governance structure of MUN, the faculty, the Senate, they only voted 52% to bring that back, and I think there was 14% abstained. So, like, what are your thoughts on bridging that divide, right? So if we're talking about, you know, you're talking about, Olivia's talking about bringing back, you know, maybe there should be no classes at 11 o'clock, and you're talking about different, you know, traditions. I think Gary mentioned, you know, maybe the ode should be played when the page is turned and things like that. So those are all great ideas, but if the public's values don't match the governance structure and the faculty here, like how do you enact that? Like how do you bridge those types of gaps, right? Regardless, that's just an example. But if you have two groups of people that have such a big divide, what are your thoughts about bringing those, you know, bringing them together?
So I think I'm the one that should at least attempt to wade into this one, if I may. No, no need to be sorry. I mean, you're only just said by the way I think. So, you know, I look at this, and if I think about the ode was made, a decision was made that didn't follow the bicameral system, the removal. That's the first problem. So then to remove and to put it back was to put it into the bicameral system and to actually strike committees, a committee to do this, to study it, to do whatever. Now, granted, that took 2 years, long time. And I can assure you I have lots of scar material on my back over this issue. Right or wrong, it is a habit. But it did go the right route, and the research that went into it was very strong. I thought, you know, the report is the report and what was done. So in fairness, though, what I would say to you, when it comes to a vote on a topic like that, I don't know how to square that circle, if you know what I'm saying. It's a difficult one because the public opinion, and you cannot always go with democracy on these topics. That's the other point, right? Because sometimes the majority is not always right. That's the difficult part. And that's what I find. I came from industry, right? So you make a decision, you move on. And collaboration, yes, you do what you talk about, you make a decision, you get it done. But what I do find is the thought process, the deep thought, and the inclusion of what I would call the minority groups or smaller groups in numbers, incredibly important. I don't know the answer, but I'm acknowledging your point to the core. You know, how do we bring them together? So I'm going to, if I may, I'm going to, see, I've been told this is the last question. Another question? There we go.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Chris Ford. I'm a business grad, 2006. I'm also vice president down at Harvey's Oil. And I guess I just wanted to say on behalf of the whole A. Harvey group, we wanted to give thanks for creating this space today in this conversation. Of course, we've had, you know, I guess given the length of tenure that with the company, we had many employees that went and served in both wars and that, and they were always welcomed back with jobs afterwards. Coming from a sales and marketing background, having attended the MUN Business Partners Day a few weeks ago, I think showing that video and making that connection to students and to the public. I think that's great advocacy work. So I just want to thank you for that. And I think that's a beautiful video and a beautiful piece to show the connection to the Great War and to Memorial University. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We have one last question from the commanding officer, which I don't think I can turn down, and we're going to run out of time.
I will certainly not say no to either one of you.
I'm watching the...
Thank you. Well, everybody, thank you very much for being here today. The discussion has been absolutely incredible. The question I have, and Earl, it goes back to what you said. Where will we be 15 years from now, 20 years from now? And sir, if I could, I'd like to ask you to respond, and maybe you as well, Private Massey. One of the things that I think is incredibly important in my role is to make sure that we look behind us, because that's where the basis for the regiment comes from. So everything that we do builds on what happened before. But also one of my roles is making sure we're looked after now and going in the future. When we talk about remembrance, unfortunately, everybody in Newfoundland, as soon as you say that, what do we all think? World War I. So what I'd like to ask is, when we consider the modern veteran, and sir, you were in Afghanistan, I was in Afghanistan, most of us here in uniform were, 15 years from now, I think there has to be a focus on the modern day veteran. If we want to make sure that MUN continues as a living memorial, there's got to be a focus on where we are right now going into the future. So how do we include the modern day veteran in remembrance in the future? Sir, where do you see that?
Hey, Kyle. So I think we are including the modern day soldier, the modern day veteran. In fact, Doctor, I believe it was you who mentioned the 158 soldiers who died in Afghanistan. Yeah, 6 of those soldiers were under my command. So it's something I think about every day. It is something that when I went to the National War Memorial yesterday, it is not just World War I. You know, obviously it started with the First World War, but we have everything up to and including Afghanistan. I think it's important that those of us who are in uniform, those of us who will be leaving uniform to become veterans, have the same passion that those who have come before us have had. But I actually am not that concerned, because I believe that we are able to more easily see now with the soldiers who are part of an institution, members of the Canadian Armed Forces who are part of an institution like Memorial. And this is one of the greatest strengths of our reserve forces across the country, that we have soldiers who, like Private Massey, who, like Olivia, are first-year university students and who are showing the people who are beside them in class, showing their faculty on a daily basis exactly what it means to give oneself to national service, but also to follow higher education. That'll be my second point. Is this is so incredibly important that we're doing this at a university, because how do we ensure that we are continuing to remember all of Canada's history, including the conflicts right now? It's through education. And that's something we can never take for granted. I know I said I was going to ask for 30 seconds, but I'd like to actually wrap my comments up by thanking you, Chancellor, and the fellow panelists for this opportunity. I'm the one in the panel who did come from away for this, so I felt somewhat intimidated by some of the questions, because I've been learning a lot about this fantastic province and the culture here over the past couple of days. It's been an absolute honor for me to be part of this panel. Thank you to all of you for your interest in being here, because this is why, Kyle, I say to you with confidence that I don't think we're in danger of not recognizing the modern soldiers, the modern soldiers, sailors, aviators of the Canadian Armed Forces. But the third and probably the most important thing I wanted to do was, as the Army Sergeant Major and I go around Canada, we ask the soldiers of the Canadian Army to do a lot of things. But at the end of the day, when we say, if you only remember one thing, it's we ask them to be exceptional ambassadors. So I actually want to present one of my Commander Canadian Army coins to Private Olivia Massey, because you are an absolutely excellent ambassador for the Canadian Army. So, I can't believe that you've got a year in uniform. You're already, is that on? Yeah, with just 1 year in uniform while you're undertaking studies here at MUN, that you're being such a fantastic soldier within the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, but also an ambassador for the Canadian Army. So thank you for what you're doing. And thanks to all the members of the Canadian Armed Forces here.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to draw this session to a close. I think I'm gone over and I'm getting all kinds of signals and waves coming at me here, but I am going to close, and I have a couple of things. I want to say thank you. I thank you to everyone for coming out on one of our rare, beautiful Saturday afternoons. And when I was speaking to the general, he said he left Ottawa in the springtime and came to Newfoundland in the winter. And I claimed, sir, you brought the snow with you. And you're welcome to take it back as well. So thank you for that. So I want to thank the panelists. You never know how this is going to work, because I've known these fellow people. I didn't know Olivia, but I do now, and I did prior to today. So I want to say thank you, and thanks very much for your open, honest, and insightful conversation. I would expect no less. So thank you for that. I want to say thank you to those that tuned in online. And by the way, the interest level, pretty incredible. And you know, this is a clear statement, as you said, General. This is pretty awesome when you see it. I do want to say thank you to all the Canadian Armed Forces members that are present here today and online. Thank you for your service. So, if I could only follow my notes. Bear with me. Now we invite everyone to the QE Library for a reception. I've been asked that when we go there are some exhibitions, and I'm hardly going to say this wrong, but please don't handle them or touch them. You can look at them. Am I saying that right? So, okay, so if you would, I'd much appreciate it. And if we could move on over there to check out the World War I artifacts and special collections. Awesome. Enjoy yourselves, and I look forward to having a chat with a lot of you later. Thank you so much for coming. Cheers.